The emergency alarm screamed through the bridge of the Starship Horizon, and Captain Jake Morrison jumped from his chair as red lights flashed all around him. His communication officer, Amy Chen, turned to face him with wide eyes, and her hands shook as she held the incoming message device. The signal came from the mining colony on Kepler 442b, and the words that came through the speakers made everyone on the bridge freeze with terror. "This is Dr. Lisa Carter from Kepler Colony calling any ship in range, and we need immediate evacuation because the Warbeast is here, and it has already killed half our people, including Chief Engineer Ben Phillips." Her voice broke with fear, and in the background, they could hear the sound of metal being torn apart like paper and people screaming. "The creature broke through our outer defenses in less than 10 minutes, and nothing we have can stop it, and we are trapped in the main facility with maybe 6 hours before it breaks through our last barriers." Jake Morrison had heard stories about the Warbeast his entire life, but he never thought he would face one himself. Every child in the galaxy knew the tales of the massive creature that stood 20 feet tall with black scales harder than starship armor and claws that could slice through reinforced steel like it was soft butter. The beast had destroyed 17 different worlds across 4 star systems, and no weapon seemed able to hurt it, and no technology could control it or even slow it down. The Zenthari had tried their famous neural suppressors that could stop any living creature by shutting down its brain functions, but the devices had no effect on the Warbeast at all. The Kelvani brought their sonic pacification equipment that used sound waves to make even the most violent animals calm and peaceful, but the beast ignored the sounds completely and destroyed their machines with casual swipes of its massive claws. Even the ancient Eridani had pulled their most powerful mind control artifacts from their secret vaults and tried to use them on the creature, but the beast had crushed the precious relics under its feet without even noticing them. Dr. Lisa Carter's voice came through the speakers again, and this time she sounded even more desperate. "We have 37 people left alive in the safe room, including 8-year-old Danny Phillips, whose father was killed in the first attack, and the boy has not spoken since he saw his father die." She paused, and they could hear something huge moving outside her location and the sound of metal groaning under enormous pressure. "The creature is not just destroying things randomly, and it seems to be hunting us specifically, and it knows exactly where we are hiding." Jake Morrison looked at his crew and saw the same thought in all their faces. Everyone knew what happened when the Warbeast appeared on a world, and there were never any survivors left to tell the story. The creature would hunt down every living person on the planet and kill them all before moving on to find its next target somewhere else in the galaxy. No one knew where it came from, or why it killed, or how it traveled between star systems without any kind of ship. Amy Chen received another transmission, and this one came from Admiral Helen Rodriguez of the Galactic Defense Force. The Admiral's voice was cold and professional as she spoke to Jake Morrison directly. "Captain Morrison, you are ordered to maintain your current position and do not attempt any rescue operations on Kepler 442b because the planet has been declared a total loss." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was even harder. "We are sending 3 battleships to evacuate any survivors we can find, and then we will use orbital bombardment to destroy the entire surface of the planet, including the Warbeast." Jake Morrison felt his stomach turn cold because he knew what orbital bombardment meant. The Defense Force would use their most powerful weapons to turn the entire planet into melted rock and burning glass, and nothing would survive the attack, including any people who might still be alive down there. It was the only way they had found to stop the Warbeast, and they had used it on 4 other worlds already. "Admiral Rodriguez, there are still 37 people alive on that planet, including a child, and we cannot just abandon them to die," Jake Morrison said into his communication device, but the Admiral's response came back immediately and without any room for argument. "Captain Morrison, those people are already dead, and they just do not know it yet, and if we do not act quickly, the Warbeast will find a way off that planet and kill millions more." Her voice became even colder and more official. "You have your Orders, Captain, and any ship that interferes with this operation will be considered in violation of galactic defense regulations and will face immediate consequences. The transmission ended, and Jake Morrison stared at the blank screen while his crew waited for his decision. Down on Kepler 442b, 37 people, including an 8-year-old boy, were trapped with the most dangerous creature in the galaxy, and they had maybe 6 hours left to live before either the beast killed them or the Defense Force turned their world into burning ash. Jake Morrison stood in the shuttle bay of the Horizon and checked his equipment one more time, while his small team prepared for what might be their final mission. He had made his decision against Admiral Rodriguez's direct orders, and he knew there would be serious consequences if they survived this rescue attempt. Pilot Amy Chen ran through her pre-flight checklist on the stealth shuttle, while Security Officer Marcus Johnson loaded extra weapons that probably would not work against the Warbeast anyway, and Dr. Kevin Walsh packed his scientific equipment to study the creature if they got close enough. "Captain, are you sure about this, because we all know what happens to people who disobey the Defense Force?" Amy Chen said as she started the shuttle engines, and Jake Morrison could hear the worry in her voice. Marcus Johnson nodded his agreement and touched the plasma rifle on his shoulder, even though everyone knew the weapon would be useless against the beast's armored scales. "Those people down there deserve a chance to live, and I will not abandon them without trying to help," Jake Morrison replied, and he climbed into the shuttle next to Dr. Walsh, who was studying data about the Warbeast on his portable computer screen. "Besides, maybe we can learn something about this creature that will help us find a better way to stop it than burning entire worlds to ash." The stealth shuttle left the Horizon without being detected by the Defense Force ships that were moving into position around Kepler 442b, and Amy Chen used all her skills to avoid the long-range sensors while they approached the planet's surface. Through the shuttle's windows, they could see the mining colony below, and most of the buildings were already destroyed, with smoke rising from the ruins and pieces of metal scattered everywhere like a child had thrown them around during a tantrum. "Doctor." Walsh pointed at his scanner readings, and his face went pale as he spoke to the others. "The creature is not moving randomly around the colony, and look at these patterns in its destruction." He showed them a map on his screen where red dots marked the beast's locations over the past few hours. "It is following a specific path, and it seems to be searching for something instead of just killing everything it finds." Amy Chen landed the shuttle behind a hill about 2 miles from the main colony facility, and they could immediately hear the sound of the Warbeast moving through the ruins. The noise was unlike anything Jake Morrison had ever heard before, and it sounded like a combination of grinding metal and deep rumbling that seemed to come from inside the Earth itself. Marcus Johnson raised his plasma rifle and scanned the area around them, but the creature was still too far away to see. They moved carefully through the destroyed buildings toward the main facility, and Dr. Walsh kept taking readings with his scientific equipment. "Captain, I am seeing some very strange things in these scans, and the creature's behavior does not match what we know about mindless killing machines." He stopped walking and stared at his device with confusion on his face. "The Warbeast is showing signs of high intelligence and complex emotional patterns, and some of these readings look almost like it is experiencing distress or sadness." Jake Morrison felt a chill run down his spine, because if Dr. Walsh was right, then the creature was not just a monster, but something much more complicated and dangerous. They reached a good viewing position where they could see the main facility, and the Warbeast was there pacing back and forth in front of the building's main entrance. The creature was even larger than the stories claimed, and its black scales reflected the sunlight like polished metal, while its massive claws left deep scratches in the ground with every step. Inside the facility, Dr. Lisa Carter watched the security monitors and tried to keep the remaining survivors calm while the beast continued its patrol outside their final hiding place. Most of the adults were crying or praying or simply staring at nothing with blank expressions, but 8-year-old Danny Phillips sat quietly in the corner and watched the screens with curious eyes instead of fear. His father, Ben Phillips, had been killed when the creature first attacked the colony, and the boy had not spoken a single word since that moment. "Danny, you should not watch those screens because seeing that monster will give you nightmares," Dr. Carter said gently, and she tried to turn the boy away from the monitors, but Danny shook his head and kept watching the Warbeast's movements with intense concentration. The other survivors whispered among themselves about their situation, and everyone knew they would be dead soon, because the creature had already broken through 2 sets of security doors, and their final barrier would not hold much longer. Some people talked about the orbital bombardment that would come if they died, and others wondered if there might be some way to escape, but nobody had any real hope left except for Danny Phillips, who seemed strangely calm about everything. Dr. Walsh crouched behind a piece of broken machinery and studied the Warbeast through his equipment, while Jake Morrison and the others watched from their hiding place. "Captain, this is incredible, and I am detecting brain activity patterns that suggest the creature is not hunting us for food or territory." His voice was filled with excitement and confusion as he continued taking readings. "The beast appears to be searching for something specific, and its emotional state indicates loneliness and frustration rather than predatory aggression." Marcus Johnson lowered his plasma rifle slightly because he was beginning to understand that this situation was more complex than anyone had realized. Amy Chen monitored their shuttle's communication equipment and reported that the Defense Force battleships would begin their orbital bombardment in less than 4 hours, which meant they were running out of time to figure out what the Warbeast really wanted and why it had come to this remote mining colony in the first place. Danny Phillips pressed his small face against the security monitor screen and watched the Warbeast with eyes that saw things differently than all the frightened adults around him. While Dr. Lisa Carter and the other survivors whispered about their approaching death and the orbital bombardment that would destroy the entire planet, the 8-year-old boy noticed patterns in the creature's behavior that everyone else had missed because they were too scared to really look. "Dr. Carter, the big animal is not trying to hurt us," Danny said quietly, and his voice surprised everyone because he had not spoken since watching his father die during the beast's first attack on the colony. The adults turned to stare at the boy, and Dr. Carter knelt down beside him with a gentle expression on her face. "Danny, that creature has already killed many people, including your father, and it wants to kill us too," Dr. Carter explained in the soft voice adults use when they think children do not understand dangerous situations. But Danny shook his head and pointed at the monitor screen where the Warbeast continued its slow patrol around the facility. "Look at how it walks and listen to the sounds it makes," Danny insisted, and his small finger traced the creature's movements on the screen. "My father taught me about animals before he died, and he said you can tell what animals want by watching how they move, and this one is not moving like it wants to hunt." The boy's voice became more confident as he continued explaining what he saw. "The creature keeps making the same sounds over and over like it is trying to talk to us, and it only breaks things when we do not answer." Dr. Carter looked at the monitor more carefully, and she had to admit that the boy might be seeing something important. The Warbeast's massive head kept turning toward the facility, as if it was listening for something, and its claws scraped against the ground in what might be a pattern instead of random destruction. The creature's deep rumbling sounds did seem to repeat in the same sequence, and its body language suggested frustration rather than pure aggression. Outside in the ruins, Jake Morrison and his team had found some very interesting discoveries that supported Danny's observations. Dr. Walsh had been exploring the area around the colony, and he found ancient stone structures buried under centuries of dirt and vegetation. The ruins were covered with strange symbols and pictures that showed creatures remarkably similar to the Warbeast. But these images were very different from the stories everyone knew about the galaxy's most feared monster. "Captain, look at these pictographs and tell me what you see," Dr. Walsh said excitedly as he used his equipment to clean dirt away from the carved stone walls. The images showed tall creatures with scales and claws, just like the Warbeast, but they were not destroying cities or killing people. Instead, the pictures showed them working alongside smaller beings and helping with construction projects and even playing with what looked like children. Marcus Johnson studied the ancient carvings, and his face showed confusion as he tried to understand what they meant. Dr. Walsh, these pictures make it look like the Warbeasts used to be friendly with other species, but that cannot be right, because everyone knows they are monsters that only know how to kill and destroy. Dr. Walsh continued examining the ruins, and he found more evidence that challenged everything they thought they knew about the creatures. Marcus, these carvings are at least 1,000 years old, and they tell the story of a civilization that lived here long before the human colony was established. He pointed to a series of images that showed the smaller beings and the Warbeasts living together in what appeared to be perfect harmony. Look at this section where it shows some kind of bonding ceremony between a young member of the smaller species and a Warbeast. Amy Chen monitored their communication equipment and reported that they had less than 3 hours before the orbital bombardment would begin. The Defense Force battleships had moved into their final positions, and Admiral Rodriguez had sent one last message demanding that all unauthorized personnel leave the planet immediately or face the consequences of remaining in the target zone. Inside the facility, Danny Phillips continued watching the Warbeast, and he began to understand something that none of the adults had figured out. The creature was not just randomly destroying things, and it was not hunting for food or territory, like a normal predator would do. The beast was desperately trying to communicate with the people inside the building, and it became more frustrated and destructive each time they failed to respond to its attempts. "The creature is lonely," Danny announced suddenly, and his words made all the adults stop talking and turn to look at him. Dr. Carter felt a chill run through her body because there was something in the boy's voice that suggested he understood the situation better than anyone else in the room. "Danny, what do you mean the creature is lonely?" Dr. Carter asked gently, and she sat down next to the boy so they could talk at the same level. The other survivors gathered around to listen because they were desperate for any hope or understanding that might save their lives. Danny looked up at Dr. Carter with serious eyes that seemed much older than his 8 years. "My father used to tell me about animals back on Earth, and he said that some creatures become very dangerous when they are separated from their families or friends." The boy pointed at the screen where the Warbeast had stopped pacing and was now standing perfectly still while staring directly at the facility. "That creature is trying to find its family, but they are all gone, and it does not know what to do. So it gets angry and breaks things." Dr. Walsh's voice came through the communication device as he continued studying the ancient ruins. "Dr. Carter, I think the boy might be right about the creature's motivations, and these pictographs suggest that the Warbeasts were never meant to live alone." His excitement was clear even through the static-filled transmission. "The images show them as part of a symbiotic relationship with another species, and they seem to need that connection to remain stable and peaceful." Jake Morrison realized they were running out of time to act on this new understanding, and he made a decision that would either save everyone or get them all killed. "Dr. Carter, we are coming to the facility, and we think there might be a way to communicate with the creature, but we need everyone inside to remain calm and follow our instructions exactly." Danny Phillips stood at the sealed door of the facility's safe room and looked up at Dr. Lisa Carter with determination in his young eyes, while the other survivors watched in horror as the boy prepared to do something that seemed completely insane. The Warbeast waited outside just a few meters away, and everyone could hear its deep breathing and the sound of its massive claws scraping against the metal floor as it continued trying to find a way inside the building. "Danny, you cannot go out there because that creature will kill you in seconds, just like it killed your father and all the other people," Dr. Carter said desperately as she tried to block the boy's path to the door controls. But Danny shook his head, and his small hand reached toward the button that would open their final barrier between safety and certain death. "Dr. Carter, the creature is not trying to hurt us, and I can prove it if you let me try," Danny replied calmly, and his voice carried a confidence that surprised all the adults around him. "My father taught me how to talk to animals, and he said the most important thing is to show them you are not afraid because fear makes everything worse." Outside the Facility Jake Morrison and his team had reached the building's outer walls, and they could see the Warbeast through the broken windows. Dr. Walsh continued taking readings with his scientific equipment, and his face showed amazement as he studied the data streaming across his device's screen. The creature's emotional patterns were unlike anything he had ever recorded from a predator, and the beast seemed to be experiencing intense loneliness and confusion rather than aggressive hunting instincts. Captain, the creature's brain activity suggests it is trying to solve a complex problem, and it appears to be searching for a specific type of response from the people inside, Dr. Walsh whispered as they crept closer to get a better view. Marcus, Johnson kept his plasma rifle ready, even though they all knew the weapon would be useless against the beast's armored scales. Amy Chen monitored their communication equipment, and her face went pale as she received an urgent message from the defense. Force battleships orbiting above them. Captain Admiral Rodriguez is demanding immediate confirmation that all unauthorized personnel have evacuated the planet, and she says the orbital bombardment will begin in exactly 90 minutes, whether we respond or not. Inside the safe room, Danny Phillips reached the door controls and his small finger hovered over the button that would open their final protection. Dr. Carter grabbed his arm gently but firmly and tried one last time to make him understand the danger he was facing. Danny, please listen to me, because I promised your father I would keep you safe and I cannot let you walk out there to die. But Danny looked up at her with eyes that held wisdom far beyond his 8 years, and he spoke words that would change everything for everyone in the galaxy. Dr. Carter, my father also taught me that sometimes you have to be brave to help someone who is hurt and lonely, and that creature outside needs help more than it needs to hurt anyone. The boy pressed the button, and the heavy metal door began to slide open with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Every person in the room held their breath as the gap widened and they could see the Warbeast standing just outside in the corridor. The creature was even more massive than it appeared on the security monitors, and its obsidian scales reflected the emergency lighting like a living shadow made of polished stone. The Warbeast turned toward the opening door, and its enormous head lowered to peer inside the safe room, where 36 terrified adults pressed themselves against the back wall. But its glowing eyes focused immediately on the small human child who stood in the doorway without showing any sign of fear or aggression. For several heartbeats, that felt like hours, predator and prey stared at each other across a distance measured in mere meters. Danny Phillips stepped through the doorway and walked slowly toward the creature while everyone behind him whispered prayers and prepared to watch him die. The Warbeast remained perfectly still as the boy approached, and its massive head tilted slightly as if it was trying to understand something completely new and unexpected. The beast's breathing slowed, and the scraping sound of its claws stopped as it focused all its attention on the fearless child. Jake Morrison and his team watched through the broken windows as Danny stopped just 3 meters away from the Warbeast and did something that no intelligent species in the galaxy had thought to try in over 1,000 years. Instead of running or fighting or trying to use technology to control the creature, the boy simply spoke to it as if it was a friend who needed help rather than a monster to be feared. "Hello," Danny said quietly, and his young voice carried clearly through the silent corridor. "I know you are lonely, and I know you miss your family, but hurting people will not bring them back to you." The Warbeast's glowing eyes focused on Danny's face, and the creature made a sound that was different from any noise it had made before. Instead of the aggressive rumbling that had terrified everyone for hours, this new sound was softer and almost questioning, as if the beast was trying to respond to the boy's words, but did not know how. Danny remembered his father's lessons about training animals back on Earth, and he thought about the ancient pictographs that Dr. Walsh had found showing these creatures living peacefully with another species long ago. The boy realized that the Warbeast was not a monster at all, but simply a lost and confused animal that had forgotten how to be anything other than destructive because it had been alone for so long. You do not have to be alone anymore, Danny said gently as he raised his small hand toward the massive creature. I know you are scared and angry, but I'm not going to hurt you, and you do not have to hurt me either. The Warbeast lowered its enormous head until it was almost at Danny's eye level, and the boy could see intelligence and sadness in those glowing eyes. Without fear or hesitation, Danny reached out and placed his small hand on the creature's snout, just like his father had taught him to do with frightened animals. The beast's scales were warm to the touch and smoother than they appeared, and the creature made another soft questioning sound as it experienced gentle contact for the first time in centuries. The moment Danny Phillips touched the Warbeast's massive snout, everything changed in ways that no one could have predicted, and the creature's entire body seemed to relax, as if a terrible weight had been lifted from its shoulders. Dr. Lisa Carter and the other survivors watched in amazement as the beast that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries made a sound that was almost like purring and gently nuzzled the small boy's outstretched hand with careful movements that showed incredible intelligence and control. Jake Morrison spoke urgently into his communication device as he watched the impossible scene unfolding before his eyes. Admiral Rodriguez, this is Captain Morrison reporting an emergency situation on Kepler 442b, and you must delay the orbital bombardment immediately because we have achieved peaceful contact with the Warbeast. His voice carried a mixture of excitement and disbelief as he tried to convince the Defense Force commander that the creature was not the mindless killer everyone believed it to be. Admiral Rodriguez's response crackled through the communication system with anger and disbelief clearly evident in her voice. Captain Morrison, you are in direct violation of orders, and there is no such thing as peaceful contact with a Warbeast, because the creature has destroyed 17 civilizations and killed millions of people. Her tone became even harder as she continued. You have 30 minutes to evacuate that planet before we turn the entire surface into molten glass, and that is final. Dr. Walsh continued studying his scientific equipment, and the readings he was getting from the Warbeast were unlike anything in the galactic database of known species. Captain, the creature's stress hormones have dropped to almost zero, and its brain activity patterns show it is experiencing something very similar to relief and happiness. He looked up from his device with wonder in his eyes. I think the boy has somehow activated dormant social behaviors that have been suppressed by isolation and trauma. Danny Phillips sat down on the floor next to the massive creature and began talking to it in the same gentle voice his father had used when training animals back on Earth. I know you have been alone for a very long time, and I know it hurts when you do not have anyone to talk to or play with. The Warbeast lowered itself to the ground and positioned its enormous head close to the boy so it could listen to every word he spoke. The other survivors slowly emerged from the safe room, and they could not believe what they were seeing as the galaxy's most feared predator behaved like a gentle giant around the 8-year-old child. Dr. Carter approached carefully, and she noticed that the creature's eyes tracked her movements, but showed no aggression or threat response when she came closer to Danny and the beast. Danny, how did you know the creature would not hurt you, Doctor? Carter asked softly, and she sat down beside the boy while keeping a respectful distance from the Warbeast. The massive creature watched her with intelligent eyes and made soft rumbling sounds that seemed almost like conversation. My father told me that animals only attack when they are scared or protecting something they love, and this creature was not acting scared or protective, Danny explained as he gently stroked the beast's scales. It was acting lonely and confused, like the stray dogs we used to help back on Earth before they found new families. Dr. Walsh made an exciting discovery as he explored more of the ancient ruins around the colony site, and he found detailed pictographs that explained the true history of the Warbeast species. Captain, I have found evidence that these creatures were originally companion animals to a highly advanced civilization that disappeared over 1,000 years ago. His voice carried growing excitement as he studied the carved stone images. The Pictographs show a bonding ceremony where young members of the extinct species would establish lifelong partnerships with individual war beasts. Jake Morrison realized they had stumbled upon one of the greatest discoveries in galactic history, and he tried again to convince Admiral Rodriguez to delay the orbital bombardment. "Admiral, the creature is not a monster, and we have proof that the warbeasts were originally domesticated companions to an extinct civilization." He watched as Danny continued interacting peacefully with the massive beast. "The boy has somehow reactivated the creature's dormant social instincts, and it is no longer aggressive or destructive." Amy Chen monitored multiple communication channels, and she reported that news of the peaceful contact was spreading throughout the Defense Force fleet. "Captain, several ship commanders are requesting permission to send scientific teams to the surface, and Admiral Rodriguez is receiving pressure from the Galactic Council to investigate this situation before proceeding with the bombardment." The warbeast seemed to understand that Danny was just a child, and it began displaying protective behaviors toward the boy and the other survivors. When one of the colonists accidentally knocked over a piece of equipment, the creature immediately moved to shield Danny from any potential danger, and its massive body created a barrier between the boy and the falling debris. Dr. Carter watched the creature's behavior with growing amazement, and she began to understand that they were witnessing the return of an ancient bond that had been lost for centuries. "Danny, I think the creature sees you as part of its family now, and it wants to protect you the same way it would have protected its original companions long ago." Danny smiled and continued petting the beast's massive head while it made contented rumbling sounds that vibrated through the floor. "I told you it was lonely, and now it has friends again, so it does not need to be angry anymore." The boy looked up at Dr. Carter with wise eyes that seemed much older than his 8 years. "Maybe all the other creatures like this one are just lonely too, and they only destroy things because they do not know how to ask for help." Jake Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications of Danny's words. If the boy was right, then every warbeast attack in galactic history might have been a desperate attempt at communication rather than mindless destruction, and the solution to the greatest threat facing civilization might be as simple as offering friendship instead of fighting back with weapons and fear. Admiral Rodriguez finally agreed to delay the orbital bombardment for 24 hours so that scientific teams could study the situation and determine if peaceful contact with other warbeasts might be possible. Jake Morrison knew they had been given a precious opportunity to change the course of galactic history, and it all depended on one brave child who had seen friendship where everyone else saw only terror. 6 months after Danny Phillips first spoke the word "sit" to the warbeast that everyone called Rex, the Kepler 442b colony had become the most famous place in the galaxy, and ships arrived daily, bringing scientists and diplomats and curious visitors from every known civilization. The boy who had tamed the untamable now worked alongside Dr. Kevin Walsh and a team of experts to establish the first official human warbeast partnership program that would change the future of galactic civilization forever. Danny had grown more confident during the months since his father's death, and he spent his days teaching other children how to communicate with the rescued warbeasts that were brought to the colony. The program had already saved 12 more creatures from across 4 different star systems, and each successful rescue proved that the beasts were not monsters, but lonely survivors of an extinct civilization who desperately needed companionship to remain peaceful and stable. Rex had become Danny's constant companion, and the massive creature followed the boy everywhere he went while serving as both protector and friend. The beast's intelligence continued to amaze everyone who studied it, and Rex had learned to understand dozens of human words and could even perform complex tasks like helping with construction projects and moving heavy equipment around the colony. Dr. Walsh documented every aspect of the creature's behavior, and his research had revolutionized the galaxy's understanding of interspecies communication. Admiral Helen Rodriguez had become one of the strongest supporters of the partnership program, after witnessing the incredible transformation that had taken place on Kepler 442b. She now commanded a joint task force that traveled throughout the galaxy, locating isolated warbeasts and coordinating rescue operations using the techniques that Danny had pioneered. The Admiral worked closely with Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to captain of the rescue fleet and given full authority to negotiate with any civilization that encountered these misunderstood creatures. Danny, we have received reports of another warbeast sighting in the Centauri system, and the local authorities are requesting immediate assistance before they resort to military action, Jake Morrison said as he reviewed the morning's communication reports. The boy looked up from where he was teaching a group of young colonists how to approach Rex safely, and his face showed the serious expression he wore whenever they discussed rescue missions. Captain Morrison, did you tell them that the creature is probably just looking for friends, and they should try talking to it instead of shooting at it, Danny replied, and he gently patted Rex's massive head while the beast made contented rumbling sounds. Over the months, the boy had developed an almost supernatural ability to understand what the creatures needed, and his success rate for establishing peaceful contact remained perfect. Dr. Lisa Carter had been appointed as the colony's official liaison to the Galactic Council, and she spent her time documenting the partnership program's successes and advocating for new policies that would protect warbeasts from unnecessary military action. Her reports had convinced dozens of worlds to adopt non-violent approaches when dealing with creature encounters, and the number of destructive incidents had dropped dramatically across the galaxy. Amy Chen had become the chief pilot for the rescue. Fleet and she specialized in the delicate task of transporting newly rescued warbeasts to the partnership colony without causing them additional trauma. Her gentle approach and patient attitude had earned the trust of both the creatures and the human teams who worked with them, and she had successfully completed 43 rescue missions without a single incident. Marcus Johnson had traded his plasma rifle for a communication device, and he now served as the program's security coordinator, but his job focused on protecting the warbeasts from frightened civilians rather than protecting people from the creatures. He worked with local law enforcement agencies throughout the galaxy to educate them about proper procedures for warbeast encounters, and his training programs had prevented countless unnecessary conflicts. The ancient ruins that Dr. Walsh had discovered around the colony site had been excavated completely, and they revealed an incredible story about the original civilization that had lived alongside the warbeasts for thousands of years. The pictographs showed a peaceful society where humans and creatures worked together to build magnificent cities and explore distant worlds before some unknown catastrophe had wiped out the smaller species and left their companions alone and desperate. Dr. Walsh, have you figured out what happened to the people who used to live with the warbeasts? Danny asked during one of their daily study sessions where they reviewed the latest discoveries from the excavation site. The scientist looked up from his research notes with a sad expression on his face. Danny, the evidence suggests that the original species died out from a plague or natural disaster that did not affect the warbeasts, and the creatures have been searching for their lost companions ever since. Dr. Walsh pointed to a series of pictographs that showed the final days of the ancient civilization. The beasts do not understand that their friends are gone forever, and they keep hoping to find them again. Danny nodded thoughtfully, and he looked at Rex, who was lying nearby listening to their conversation with obvious intelligence. So when Rex and the others attack places, they are not trying to hurt anyone, and they are just looking for their families. The boy's voice carried a mixture of sadness and understanding as he realized the full tragedy of the warbeast situation. The success of the partnership program had attracted attention from the highest levels of galactic government, and Danny found himself appointed as an official ambassador for interspecies understanding despite being only 8 years old. He traveled to important meetings with Rex at his side, and his simple wisdom had influenced policies that affected billions of people across dozens of worlds. Jake Morrison received word that 3 more warbeasts had been located in remote systems, and rescue teams were being prepared for immediate deployment. The program had grown from a desperate last resort into a galaxy-wide initiative that represented hope and cooperation between different species, and Danny's brave decision to reach out in friendship had changed the course of history. As Danny sat with Rex watching the sunset over their rebuilt colony, he thought about his father, Ben Phillips, and how proud the man would be to see what his son had accomplished. The boy had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting against something you fear, but from offering kindness to something that needs help, and his simple act of courage had proven that understanding could triumph over violence when people were willing to see beyond their prejudices and reach out with open hearts.